Good morning. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I'm live in, where am I? Houston, Texas. It is such a pleasure to be here, to be at the Broadband Communities Summit. We are in a press room that Harrison Edwards put on, so we're grateful for that. At the same time, there's a press conference going on that may be concluding soon, and there's a lounge here, AT&T's lounge at Broadband Communities. So we are going to struggle with the ambient noise, but we're going to do our best, and we're going to have a great discussion whether or not you can hear it or not. I am so excited to welcome three great panelists. We may or may not have additional one or two join us either in person or online, but for now, pleased to welcome Kevin Donnelly. Kevin heads up the National Multifamily Housing Coalition or Association? Council. Okay, great name there. I don't know, like there's a kind of a council housing in Britain that has a different implication, but in the United States, it's a great word. And Kevin, I've met before. In fact, you've been on several of our, or at least one of our Broadband Breakfast Live Onlines talking about multifamily housing. So after Kevin kicks us off a little bit, we're going to hear from Ted Maluch.
That's right.
Ted is the president of Smart One Solutions, Inc., a Canadian technology company, and he's got some great things that he's going to talk about, advancing our conversation on the smart home and the smart apartment building. That's what we want to talk about, but we're going to kind of set the stage and work up to it, because this conference, Broadband Communities, is really, I sometimes say, two conferences in one. It's a conference for the multifamily housing communication space, and it's a conference for the economic development and fiber space. And obviously they interact. There's a good bit of interaction, but this is one of the mainstays of the conference here. And then our third panelist is Kurt Rafflau. But got that right, Kurt?
Yeah, Rafflau is great.
Kurt is the head of product marketing at Adtran, which of course is a maker of fiber electronics and other products. He can tell us more about things he's doing in the multi-family space. And once again, this is a program we do every week, every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. It's of course 11 here in Houston, and we are excited to cover a wide range of topics. Next week, we're going to be in person in Washington, D.C. at Clyde's Gallery Place, and we're going to talk about Mr. Musk who comes to Washington in regards to Twitter. So always a great topic, but let's go to the topic of the day, the smart home and the smart apartment building. So Kevin, kick us off a little bit about some of your observations being Broadband Communities here.
Sure.
And speak loudly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be with Drew and the team at Broadband Breakfast as always. Kevin Donnelly, VP of Government Affairs, Technology, and Strategic Initiatives at NMHC. We are the leading trade group that represents the multifamily housing industry in Washington. Traditionally federally focused, but we have a huge industry initiative team, and that's why we're here at Broadband Communities Summit. Over the past, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, we have partnered with Broadband Communities on their multifamily track, really to give our members, there was so much synergy between our work in tech and telecom, smart tech, and the work of Broadband Communities, that we decided that it made a lot of sense for our membership and for our provider partners for us to link up and officially join arms. So happy to be here in Houston. I think the content over this past couple of days has been really great. I think it tees up a lot of pressing issues that our members are facing on the ownership and management side, development side. And then also, I just walked out of a session, probably the most timely, about how to get broadband and technology to affordable housing communities where the economics are so tough. And that's something that at NMHC we have been spending an important amount of time on, with the Biden administration trying to get funds out the door, with advocates for education and telemed and so much at stake. And all sort of dovetailing with that is the importance of broadband. And for our members, that is job number one. It is the amenity of the day. So that's why it's so important to be here. It's so important to have our provider partners.
Kevin, tell us just a little bit more about the context for the multifamily discussions, right? So like in the non-multifamily, or let's just call it the fiber to the home, we were talking a lot about, hey, let's get fiber all the way to the home. Let's just not get it to the node or something. But so like, what are the different issues and aspects that multifamily dwellings deal with in terms of getting that kind of capacity? Because you don't just string one wire to the node, you've got to kind of traverse the whole building, right? So what are some of the unique issues that creates?
Well, I think, it's a two-pronged question, really. If you're a new build, if you're a developer going in from ground up, you're able to run fiber to the unit, wire that property for the future. The challenge for us really is the existing housing stock. And if you look at the vast majority of apartment communities across the country, most were built over the past 20 years, if not even beyond that. So imagine the infrastructure that's in place. So you have a challenge of needing to decide, do you deploy fiber, do overbuilds, do you try to deploy some other type of technology? We're seeing an increasing shift to manage Wi-Fi systems, all with the intention of ensuring residents have seamless connectivity from curb to couch, so that there is no noticeable drop-off. So whether they are living in a Class A luxury property in a downtown urban core, or they're living in rural America in an apartment community, that they have access to modern broadband. And so for an owner or developer, it really is dependent on the property. There's no silver bullet or no template that a owner can follow. It really is working with providers, whether they be large telcos, large cable, WISPs, you name it. We need to find innovative solutions to make sure we have connectivity, and especially when it relates to smart tech, whether it's access control, whether it's cameras, you name it, we need a strong broadband network.
Well, wonderful. You've raised more issues that I can't wait to get to, but let's broaden the conversation and get Ted and Kurt in the conversation. And let's talk some more specifics about, like, what is the home of the future life? What kinds of things can one do in a multi-family space when you've got that kind of high capacity? Ted.
Yeah. What I like to bring to this is I come to this conference about broadband, but that's not where I started. I actually started with smart communities, and I used to be on the owner side. So I was a CIO for a large real estate developer. 20 years ago, I saw the concept of a smart building, which was put a network in a building and you can transform it. You need networks if you want to do sustainability. How do you read sensors? How do you actuate devices? How do you make a building smart? It needs this network. And then it became this, how do you make it secure? You need people to see cameras. So basically you need this infrastructure in a building. And as I pursued that, understanding that we needed to do that to transform the living experience, the operating experience, all of a sudden I realized, well, if I put a network in a building, why don't I give everybody internet? So it's kind of like the reverse of what's going on here, where people are starting with the internet, now starting to say, I want to add services to it. So we need networks in buildings. Now, what is this smart building about? So everybody knows about smart homes. What's the difference when we get to a smart building? Well, now we have smart homes. We connect them over a common network, and now it turns it into a community. So now not only can people do lighting control, thermostats, and all the rest of those things, but now they can access things that are central to the building. Like they can see cameras around the bottom of their building. The package system can be directly integrated to them. Lobby entrances can be integrated to them. And then we create this platform where we can deliver the next generation services. Now, the reason I get so passionate about this is stuff we actually have to do. Like in North America, we're falling behind the rest of the world, and this network is the key to being able to solve the problems. We can do sustainability, assisted care, and this is where we need to be moving. Now, what we did in Canada, which was a little different, was the telecoms are fighting against each other on broadband, and it's a race to the bottom. So we said to one of the large telecoms, which is Bell Canada, we said to Bell, why are you competing on internet? Why don't you take this smart community solution that we've developed, bundle it with your internet, let's sell a smart building. Not internet, a smart building that includes super fast internet in the home and common spaces, but also allows you to have all these sustainability features, car share, smart EV charging, I could keep going. But you get it, we transformed it. Let's not compete against the commodity and create the race to the bottom. Let's create a new product category. And it's actually worked very well. And the advantage of the large telecoms have better availability of cash. They're able to amortize equipment costs. So essentially, we can create great experiences for people without breaking budgets. So I'll stop at that point.
But Ted, do speak just a little bit more about your place in the ecosystem, and this is sort of something that Kevin and I chatted about yesterday. Like in the non-multifamily space, you've got the providers and you've got the consumers, right? And sometimes you've got like citizens and neighbors who want to work together to get, but like that's kind of the dynamic. But in the multifamily space, you have to add in at least a third one. That is to say, consumers, real estate owners, and the providers, right? And sometimes their interests don't align. Sometimes they do. That's obviously part of the challenge. You're a vendor, right? As I understand it, Ted, you provide tech solutions. So do you go to the building owner or do you go to the provider? Or does it matter, right? Like who is your entry point to get Smart One solutions into a new community?
We go to both, right? We work with the provider provides an introduction. But what I kind of want to get to, what's a bit different about what we're providing is why is this not like smart homes? Like you get Google and Amazon trying to put a speaker in a home and do individual things. But when we get into buildings, we're actually re-engineering the building to some extent. When we're doing HVAC control and advanced HVAC optimization, we actually have to influence design drawings. So we are actually actively with an engineering team changing how the building's designed to be able to hit all these different features. So that's what's a little bit different about what we're doing. So the telecom generally creates an introduction. They can't speak deep enough about what we do. They introduce us to the client, and we go in with the client. They sign a contract. We deploy an engineering team. We start working with their consulting engineers. We redesign the building. We deploy the solution, and then we manage it. The telecom holds a billing relationship. They help amortize costs, and that's how we bring this whole thing together. And generally what we're seeing now is once somebody starts working with us, they keep working with us. And now there's this proliferation of innovation that's just amazing. So I'll give an example of just a cool one. In one of the communities we just deployed, someone moved in and they were hearing impaired. They asked us, what can you do? We paired Philips Hue light bulbs to our system. When someone calls from the lobby, the light goes green. When there's an alarm, it goes red.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like just simple things.
Yeah.
Like there's so many cool, simple things that. And I think what's different is, and this is a place where I want people to look, this is not about bells and whistles. I say, it's not about the ornaments hanging on a Christmas tree. You got to build the tree. It starts with the networks. And this is where I want the telecoms to get it. Telecoms, it's not internet. Internet's a service on a network. Telecoms, you're delivering network. And as North America, we need networks. And I also, one last point is just what you see happening in the multifamily building, where we create these connected communities, that is the metaphor for the smart city. The same things we're doing, we're creating mini smart cities. It's easier to do it in these contained environments, but the same concepts and principles are going to start applying to smart cities. And that's what we need to see, and that's the direction we need to move in.
It's another great thought for us to come back to, the smart apartment building being a little mini smart city in itself, right? So let's come back to that. But again, let's broaden our conversation. Kurt, our audience is Adtran is no stranger to our audience, but tell us just a little bit about who Adtran is and how you kind of factor into the multifamily environment.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Drew. Glad to be talking to folks here in virtual land with Broadband Breakfast.
You speak up just a little.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I can get loud.
Okay, good.
So my name is Kurt Rafflob. I'm responsible for product marketing and analyst relations at Adtran. And at Adtran, we are an open networking company. That's really important.
Yeah, open network.
Yeah. So what that means is for the past 100 years, when we built a network for telecom or datacom, it was a very proprietary network. When you do that, it really makes any sort of innovation that you can do with a network, as Ted was talking about, very, very, very challenging. I'll put simple things like, one of my most favorite features that ever was put on a network was call line ID. I use it every week when my mother-in-law calls. Right. Love it. Well, the truth be is that particular concept was created like in 1982. It took 3 different presidents before that was actually rolled out in Bell South in between about 92 and 94. Right. That's just craziness. Now, if you look at any other network, whether it's a social media network, what we're doing, you look at Google or any of these web scale type of companies, right? They have a staff meeting on Monday, and they're rolling out proof of concept on Friday. So, start creating these networks, regardless of what they're built on. That's really important. Or again, if it was our cable companies with coax, a completely different look and feel than a telecom with twisted pair phone lines. Any app that was created for cable couldn't really work well on twisted pair. Now we have fiber. So I like to use analogy sometimes of a road. Whether a road is gravel, my analogy here is just on whether it's fiber or wireless or cable or coax, whatever you can get into these buildings, whether these buildings are 50 years old, 5 years old, 5 months old. My analogy is around just roads that we drive on. We don't buy different cars. We don't have to have a different way of insuring them, registering them. We don't have a separate police force for speeders, whether it's a gravel road or concrete road or asphalt.
Right.
We have to kind of just have to get to that, so that it really kind of opens up innovation when we do that.
Well, a lot of great points there, Kurt, about like the technology should be able to work whatever kind of road you're traveling on. So like an ambulance should be able to travel on a highway or a street or a dirt road, right? Is the analogy there. And I guess the way I'm saying this, IP traffic, TCP IP, that protocol enables all of these, and this is just kind of basic Internet 101, allows all of this to travel, whether it's over a fiber network or a coax network or a twisted pair copper or wireless, right? It can travel over all those. But another way to take that point you just made, Kurt, is homes or apartment buildings have in-building wiring, right? And sometimes that's old, right? Now I've been told that you can bring fiber to the building, and even if you don't have fiber in all the walls, copper or coax will still be able to get very high speeds, even gigabit speeds, because the distances aren't huge and other factors can be controlled. Could you, as a technology company that kind of deals with this aspect a lot, could you just enlighten me a little bit more on what is kind of the necessary minimum?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an industry, gigabit has become almost pedestrian here. That is the floor.
Right.
Most people, if you do look at it, as far as use cases, most people can argue and say, the most prolific use cases of videos and 4K and 8K cameras that a home or a building can have, probably 100 or 200 or 300 megabits. So what's a gigabit? It's because as an industry, we finally learned after 100 years that we've got to stop looking at our forecast of what we need by measuring it with what we have today.
Right.
If we did those kind of things, we can go back 20 years when people looked at 1 megabit coming to a home, and that was almost a joke. It's like, how many emails can you write to need 1 megabit? No one realized that we were going to go beyond Netscape 4, and something like YouTube is going to show up, and the smart devices, right? So we stopped doing that. So gigabit is where it's at. So something that AdTran we talk about is fiber technologies and something called fiber extension technologies. When we say fiber extensions, because we're extending the capability, the look and feel of fiber, which is low latency, gigabit symmetric, not just gigabit one way. We want to have symmetric. So yes, technology like second generation, very important. Second generation GFast can provide over a gigabit symmetric over your twisted pair. That's basically a fancy word for your phone line,
Right.
or your coax cable that a lot of buildings have been fed with since 1996.
So there's a big push right now with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to get higher speed technology. And when we've heard from leaders from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, we had the head of NTIA, Alan Davidson, at our Broadband Breakfast last month. He was emphasizing fiber. I mean, he recognizes that not everywhere is going to be fiber, but he was definitely emphasizing fiber as a technology. And obviously, that's what you're saying too, Kurt, as I understand it. But yet, we don't need to go and, or do we need to go and rip out the coax and the copper within a multifamily? Or do we need to get to the TED type inventions, right? Kevin, to kind of, what are all of your thoughts on like the in-building wiring component of this
Let me add
smartphone.
one piece that I'd love to hear the comment on it. The one challenge that I think that's still happening is when you listen to some of the conversations, I don't want to go into technical la land on this, but a lot of them are building networks to only deliver internet to the home. They're not creating networks that allow you to segregate networks within the building. What I mean by that is to carve off a VLAN to say, now I can control energy on this network, or I can control security on this network. The one danger in all the conversations that we're having is that, like, the telecoms built purpose-built networks to do a triple play to homes. They did not build networks that allowed you to create segregated building networks, which is what we actually need.
Like, is he talking software-defined networking here, Ted?
Basically being able to take the building network and multi-purpose it, so it's not only being used to deliver broadband, because that's where we need to be. Like just one last piece on this is, like, you know, you have an aging population. How are you going to manage it? Well, you need connected sensors. Well, you got to connect sensors to networks. So if there's no network there, you're not going to connect it. So again, the biggest challenges that we face are solved by networks, but the networks have to be created right. But I'd love to hear your side of that, because
No, that's absolutely.
you know, that's the part that I
No.
see as the challenge in the conversations in this
Yep.
in this conference.
Yeah, that's exactly the key point is these networks that you're creating have to be open, they have to be software defined, so that open public APIs, no different than your smartphone. Somebody in a basement can come up with an amazing application to make people's lives better. He doesn't have to sit there and homologate it against all these one-off networks. It's going back to your analogy on the ambulance. If I create an ambulance, I don't have to sit there and go from town to town, go from provider to provider, and make sure their road is wide enough and can handle this ambulance. I mean, those days are really going to go the way of the dinosaur here.
Right.
So we're trying to impress upon our service provider customers that the way they need to do things, very much like Ted was saying, is if when I talked about, go back to when I talked about gigabit and that being very future proof. Well, that's kind of a concerning thing for a service provider. Prior to fiber and gigabit, how they kind of ratcheted up their value proposition to a customer is on bandwidth. I brought in some DSL, it was 3 meg. A year later, it was now 10 meg. What they allowed them to do is your tariff, and it was valuable to you because there's more applications you can go on. So your $20 bill went to 30. Right now, Ted talked about race to the bottom. We've got providers out there selling a gigabit connection to a living unit or a home as low as $40. How do they get back to the 50, 60, and 70 and 100 that they were getting from us 20 years
And
ago?
what's your answer to that?
Yeah, it's what
New
Ted was saying.
services?
So new services. And new services have to be something that you can lay on very, very easily.
We certainly want to invite your questions. Particularly if you're on Zoom, we stream on Zoom and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. But if you're on Zoom, go ahead and ask your questions. I can see them on this little device. I'll ask them of our panelists. I want to come to what Ted started off a little bit on, which is the smart apartment as a kind of a mini smart city. Okay, let's elaborate on that. What do you mean by that? And what are some of the applications that we're starting to see in apartment buildings that are kind of prototypes for what we would see in the city?
So the key in it is that you got the open network, now you got an app. Well, you use the app to control your home, your thermostat, you use it to let people in the building, you use it to look around your building. But what it does is it just creates attention to an app, right? So now you've got everybody in the building looking at the same interface. Well, now that they're looking at the same interface, now all of a sudden you can do things with sustainability. Like you can actually communicate about issues regarding consumption. So you can maybe modify behavior. But then once you got everybody looking at an app, now this is the stuff we're doing that starts to look like the smart city of the future. I need a car. I go to my app, I book it, I pay on a consumption basis. We just put a car share in the building. I need the car to charge my EV. I go, I book it on the app, I pay. I can actually visibly see my car charging from the underground, right? We're doing virtual malls. I click on market, it shows me the stores. What we did is we embedded shopping mall software in our app. I click mall, it shows me the stores that are there. The stores have self-serve management portals. So what we did is we actually just took shopping mall software that's in hundreds of malls across North America and embedded it. So now we created retail connection. A package comes in, it comes on my phone. I go downstairs and I claim it. I can add order fulfillment, right? And then we're doing automated parking. You're visiting me. I punch in your license plate, you park. We're putting in pay stations to automate parking decks in mixed-use communities. Then the last one, which is I want to go to, this is the launch point of what the future is. And then, sorry, I'm going to start jumping around too much. So let me focus on this
No,
one.
these are great. These are great
But
applications.
this is one that we're doing right now. One of our clients said, I could see someone wanting to put their parent in this community. It's close to the city. What can you do? We took our app, we stripped out everything that would invade privacy. So you don't see who's calling, you don't see any private messages, but if the smoke alarm goes off, there's a flood in the unit, their security alarm goes off, my phone rings. So that's not just that my dad's elderly, that can be my 21-year-old daughter moving into a place, and I can actually have visibility. I can see the cameras at the bottom of her building because I'm watching the news and it just said there was a major security intersection. At that intersection, I can actually see she's okay. This really happened. My daughter was staying in one of our communities, calls me at 3 a.m. and goes, Papa, what do I do? The fire alarm's going off. I literally picked up my phone, looked at the cameras around the bottom of the building, and I said, don't worry about it, right? But so those are the things. Now that's family care. Now what we've done is we've taken that and the next generation of this, and this is the stuff that to me is cool. We funded 5 universities across the country. When we built the infrastructure, it wasn't just the network. We're capturing time event series data of everything that happens. Switch went on, door opened, thermostat was touched. We can see all the event series data. Now we did things to make sure it's private, to observe privacy, but now we got researchers running machine learning and AI against those data sets. You can use that for sustainability. You can use, so security, I give the security example. You don't set your security alarm anymore. If your door opened at noon and it never opens at noon, it's gonna say, hey, your door just opened, right? Or, integrating it with assisted care. I can go and say, hey, check on that. It'll show me everything that happened in the unit.
I've used in my single family housing a kind of a smart home app, different ones I've used. And some of these features I've heard of, the ability to check the temperature of your home from remote.
Yeah.
And those are all using just kind of typical IP networks outside the home. Is there something else going on besides the kind of popping an IP connection between the home? Like what's and this is where I want to come back to Kevin in a moment, is what is the need to have managed Wi-Fi all about? Is that part of this smart city of the future, Ted, that you're talking about?
Managed Wi-Fi is there, but it's a service on the network. I'm not going to say it's not important. Right. You have to have it. It's like, go home, and I always say to someone, shut up your Wi-Fi in your house and see how long until your kid's crying and your wife yells at you. It's just going to happen, right? So I think the broadband, the Wi-Fi pieces are the table stakes, and they justify the investment of the network. But then once you got the network, we need to start doing these things about aggregating data in open ways and running machine learning concepts against it to solve the problems that we need to solve, right? And that's what we're doing. And then everything I just described in a building, imagine it now that I'm in a community where I have a shared package system for receiving things. I can book a car that I need. I can see cameras throughout my neighborhood. Take those same concepts. Now and I'm going to launch us out of this into this. That's where 5G is. That's the purpose of 5G. 5G is not to make your cell phone faster. It is to create the network for the distributed community. So we're doing in these localized communities, we can do that because the networking technology is different. But when we start to create a network across broader areas, so I just like to say that, and I'll stop because I don't want to take over this thing, but the internet is a network across the entire world. What you're seeing happen now is we're creating pods of networks, sub-networks of communities where we can now physically connect the things within communities. That's the smart city. The smart building is the first step.
Yeah, I was gonna say, one thing, it's really important, a little delineation there, right? We talked about at the beginning, gigabit and fiber. Now those are things we're talking about the internet. We're talking about allowing people to work from home, learn from home, entertain from home, right? Let's make sure we separate those things. Our analogy was those highways with the ambulance, right? Those important things. Now let's move aside. Now we're talking about equally important bicycle paths and walking paths. Those aren't the same networks, right? Those aren't the same highways. So those are what we're talking about, wireless. Now we're talking about, low power, long range. We're not talking about bandwidth. We're talking about connections, right? And that's why, exactly, 5G or Wi-Fi 6. Most Wi-Fi, at least I'm glad that the industry changed the numbering system from ridiculous alphabet that no one understood to 2 is better than 1, 3 is better than 2. But Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 have less to do with the bandwidth in the home and making that wireless connection much more robust, being able to handle the dozens of devices, these IoT devices, these sensors.
Yeah.
That's what it's built on, right?
We've got a question here from Dr. Ron Suarez. Thank you for your questions always, Dr. Suarez. He's speaking about he had a spinal cord injury and paralysis of his fingers, and he made sure there was a smart hospital room set up for him so he could use voice commands to control lights, fan, media on the TV, and call nurses. It took, as he says, 20 requests to IT people in the hospital to get questions answered. But he's analogizing this to making the internet more like the sidewalk, connecting people, students, teachers, nonprofits, and businesses without a toll booth controlled by mega league monopolies. And here's the question: what can we do to get some of these smart hospital rooms, smart assisted living units? What are some of the applications of the sort we've been talking about, Kurt and Ted, and love your take on this too, Kevin, that brings these types of smart homes, smart building facilities, systems to assisted living facilities?
Yeah, to me, just the quick is we haven't smoked into as much as we should. We're talking about the networks and the connection. Now it's the connection to the information. It's the analytics.
Right.
That's when this stuff really starts opening up.
Right.
And no pun intended on the open. You start having open APIs, just like your smartphone does. You can start creating applications that take the data that's already there, mine the data, put in a data lake, start looking at it. This isn't a privacy thing. This is looking at the data lake in totality, so we can start making really good decisions on how to. For the providers, it's great. You can monetize it, but for us as users, it just makes our lives better. This individual here talking about, if we had all these different smart hospital rooms where we're taking information from those things, we could take it to another level where data becomes actionable, it becomes automated. In other words, the analogy you talked about, Ted, there's a fire alarm. They realize, wait a second, there's a fire alarm. Before there's a fire alarm, let's actually do some sensors. Go through, it's like, no, this fire alarm this was actually a kid that pulled it. Because I felt no heat rise, no smoke, no anything. Don't even call the police. Those type of things. Don't even call the fire department. Your daughter doesn't even phone you.
Yeah.
You just go to the next level. And same thing, this individual, it's like it wasn't 20 calls to IT department. He actually, in his own app, in his hand, created the network he wanted in his hospital room.
I just want to add to that, the hospital room is great. I love that. But this is the principle that we need for the future. The principle for the future is what we call circle of care, right? So when I just said our family care app is I can pair to my dad's unit so I can watch.
Right.
So this is what we're trying to do, is use the technology to expand circle of care. So it's not just health professionals delivering the care. So in a multifamily unit building, would it be possible for someone in the building to volunteer to go check on someone? Right? Those are the principles that we need so we can deliver higher level of care at the same investment. That's the challenge. So I agree with everything on the hospital room and the connectivity, but what we need to do now is use the technology that we can offer higher levels of care with the same amount of people. And if we don't do it, we're screwed, right? Like we can't do it. The demographics are there. There's not, and the budgets aren't there. If we don't do this, we're done. That's why I become so kind of passionate about saying, build the networks, create the data lakes, create the structures and strategies that we need to be able to address what's changing. Broadband's cool. Broadband justifies the investment for the network and makes it possible. Let's not lose sight of that. It's very important, but it's not the end game.
I think the biggest challenge that from the traditional multifamily standpoint is, and I think you started getting there, was the cost, right? If we are building a Class A luxury property in the urban core, we're flush with cash. We can put in all the bells, whistles, the network that's going to support us today through tomorrow. The challenge is existing infrastructure or in affordable or workforce housing, you really start getting constrained on your ability to deploy a superior network that's going to back up not just the broadband capability, but also the resilient strategies you need, the smart tech. So I think that's the real tension point in the industry is how do you start to invest enough in the future that you're going to be able to meet the needs of assisted care or whatnot. And I know in the senior housing space, that is a particular focus right now, is trying to make sure that there is that roundabout care where you have the touch points. Student housing is the same thing. You have those touch points for family care without necessarily invading privacy. And, there's so many different pieces here.
Well, I want to kind of pivot from that to this point about multifamily and managed wireless. I want to be respectful of Kurt and your need to leave. You please stay with us the whole time.
Yep.
If you need to take off, just give me a little signal and we'll make sure you get some last words in. But so I want to come back to this question of managed Wi-Fi, right?
Sure.
And Kevin, you'll forgive me. I want to go back to the conversation you were part of, and it was a bit of a controversial one because we had different points of view. And obviously, the FCC about 2 months ago put forth rules that basically included some types of exclusive marketing agreements. And you'll correct me or refine what I'm summarizing. And we had advocates on the program with you. They were saying, yes, this is good. We need more of this. To ban exclusive agreements, exclusive marketing agreements, so that there can be competition, there can be new entrants, and you and others who often represent either the multifamily real estate owners or even some providers talk about, well, I mean, we're not saying there can't be another network in there, but there's a bulk buy, there's a value to that bulk buy, and that includes the whole building. That includes being able to cover the whole building with wireless, to be able to adopt some of these smart technologies that we spent most of our time here talking about. So, Kevin, could you just kind of again orient us to this? What are the different points of view on this, and do we really need to be on the same network in the same physical network, or can there be multiple competing wireless networks within the home? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to the point that the multifamily industry is not, a one blob structure. We are very diverse. So there are going to be instances where choice and competitive carriers coming in is going to be the model that a property owner or operator will use. There will be times where a bulk network or a managed Wi-Fi solution is what is appropriate or best for consumers. I think when you go to the FCC and you look at the proceedings that they've undertaken over the past several years, it's been at this sort of high-level review of competition and choice in the multi-tenant environment. So not just multifamily, but also looking at office and retail. I think there are some, and I think you rightly describe them as advocates, consumer advocates, who sometimes talk out of both sides of their mouth. They want competition and choice because they see it as a consumer benefit, but they also don't want to acknowledge that in multifamily, residents of our apartment communities typically have access to better, faster, more reliable, and cheaper broadband service. So it's this tension point that they have to reconcile with. Are we in pursuit of superior, reliable broadband for Americans or for apartment residents, or are we in pursuit of a plethora of internet choices? I think if you look at the resident preferences survey that NMHC puts out every 2 years, residents don't necessarily care about the brand of internet, the company behind it, XYZ. What they care about is that it's always on, immediately available upon move in, and that when there's a hiccup, that they don't have to deal with hold times and service disruptions with the provider. So I think from NMHC standpoint, we will never necessarily embrace fiber to the home as the model, right? We think fiber to the home is great and should be utilized whenever possible. But for us, if Wi-Fi or a managed Wi-Fi product is the solution that can work, that's what we need to do.
Just to be clear, when you say not embrace fiber to the home, you mean fiber to the individual apartment unit, right? I mean, you're not saying there's a problem, or
no,
I would think everyone needs to have fiber to the building, to the node,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, because you're going to be really out of luck if you've
Yeah.
got a coax or a copper coming to your building.
I think that's the challenge. And you mentioned NTIA and Alan Davidson, stressing fiber. We agree with it. Fiber is the future. The challenge is, in the vast majority of the housing stock in America, both single and multifamily, fiber is not an option at this point.
And again, just to be clarified, fiber is not an option, meaning fiber inside wiring.
Correct.
Fiber, once you get to the node, there's not fiber in those walls, right? There's coax, and we talked about that earlier, about
Coax,
how you can still
copper,
get good speeds once you get fiber to the node of the building. But to get the best, presumably you do want fiber all the way snaking through the
So
wall.
I mean, again, if you're a new build, yes, you're going to deploy fiber, right? You have capital behind you to do that. That's great. But if you're an affordable or low-income housing property where we are begging hand over fist for a provider to come and serve us, we can't deploy fiber. We can't do that over. So a Wi-Fi solution or a bulk internet deal with a large provider or even an independent, frankly, may be the best option.
Let's just define our terms. What is a bulk deal? And again, this is baby stuff for the multi-tenant, multi-family industry that's here. But for some of our listeners may not necessarily focus on bulk. What is a bulk sale as opposed to a typical residential sale?
Yeah, so I mean, and jump in and correct me or steer me a different way.
I want to get there.
But
the
bulk,
Wi-Fi.
I mean, bulk, at its core is a service offering from the property in partnership with a provider to offer internet. Sometimes it includes video product, and it's all essentially on immediately upon move-in. No credit checks.
Like a utility.
Yeah,
right?
it's essentially it's there.
Electric.
It's there. Now the benefit is whether it's a bulk or a managed Wi-Fi solution, that provides a always-on network behind it for the property. So that's your resilient strategies, your energy, leak detection, all of that works on that bulk network, which is why increasingly we're seeing more and more owners shift to that model. Is not only for the consumer convenience, the resident preferences, but it's also about the building strategy.
So let me go right to the managed Wi-Fi to get everyone's thoughts on this. Is it the case that there needs to be like a bulk deal or a kind of a collective, everyone gets one provider for there to have a successful managed Wi-Fi in the building? Or can you have multiple managed Wi-Fi within the same building?
You've got it. By doing bulk, you have a greater incentive to achieve that outcome. Put it that way. So if you want everyone to have choice individually, you're losing a carrot that's allowing you to deliver the other piece. Now, the other piece I want to add, this is just logical. So why is bulk better than individual subscriptions? Telecoms like individual subscriptions. They get higher margins if they can hit higher pen rates. But just think about it. There's one bill to the community. I'm not billing everybody individually. There's no collection risk. I've blocked out every other telecom. That's why the business model works. Now, and earlier on, people spoke about electricity. What you're seeing with internet is what happened with electricity. It was the same thing. Today, you don't even talk about it. Power goes in the building and that's it. You're not asking who's it from and it's effectively bulk distribution, right? We're just at that inflection. And I just want to make one last point. The one piece that people miss in this, multifamily buildings had networks anyways. People think it's a new thing. It's not. Your energy management system ran on a network, your access control. That's why I kind of argue that it's not really more expensive. It's more expensive because we're putting in parallel infrastructures. If we actually optimize a design of a building, it's really not more expensive. But we got to move everyone, and it's hard to move everyone. We're moving, inching along. So even with us, my vision was always that the smart community solution runs on the backbone of the network provided by the provider. But they didn't architect their network that way. But that's what we need to do. So I think we're just at this point where we're inching along. Bulk, just so you know, it's still competitive. It's competitive on a bulk basis. At the end of 7 years, you retender it. So you're still giving choice, but you're taking advantage of the bulk purchase. And that's why I'm an advocate for it. Choice is great. Okay, yeah, it's not going to lead to a lower price.
Well, very good. Kurt,
Yeah, I
got to
just
hear your perspective on
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. The technology exists that whether you had 100 tenants on 100 different networks, that it all works, right? I mean, managed Wi-Fi, especially in an apartment building, is mandatory. Go back to that. Go back to the analogy that talked about electricity. There's codes for what you have to put in the home. Right now, there's no code for what kind of Wi-Fi you put in your home. Service providers have a big issue with delivering excellent electricity to the building, excellent connectivity to the building. Then the consumer is allowed to go to a box store and buy a non-carrier grade Wi-Fi. It'd be no similar than him deciding he's going to use binder twine to wire up his home. You don't allow that, right? It's going to burn it down. Right now, we don't kind of have those rules in, but the technology's there. And if we have service providers, you have 5 service providers in an apartment building, as long as they put managed Wi-Fi, it's carrier grade, the wireless technology doesn't trounce on each other. Everybody's individual living unit has excellent service.
But I think I'm hearing a different answer from Ted than from Kurt. Ted's saying you really do want a kind of a bulk basic managed Wi-Fi. And Kurt, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying you can have multiple competing managed Wi-Fi.
And still have the same value proposition that Ted's looking at, right? Because absolutely, if you went back 5 years and tried to do a non-bulk, yes, you're going to have technical issues. You're going to have this provider trouncing on this provider's wireless. The technology gets in place. Now we can channel hop. It's very analogous. It's very, very analogous. Not even analogous. It's exactly the same as 5G. Right. No one worries about the fact that you're in downtown in the city. Someone's on Verizon, and the guy sitting right beside you is on T-Mobile. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt anything. But 5 years ago with wireless, that was an issue.
Ted, reaction.
There's no reaction. I think we're seeing all the same kind of pieces to this. I think the key core to this was go back in the journey where I started, which was a building has a network. And if I put a network in a building, I can distribute internet over in the most efficient way.
Carrier grade network, solid, robust network.
Solid, robust network. And then once the network's there, internet's only one of the things. Now that I got internet, well, I'm going to do energy management, assisted care. I'm going to start delivering every imaginable service over that network. So it's a network. It's not internet. And that's a piece a lot of people say. So I remember one guy, actually my old company, one of the owners comes, why do I need a network? I have an internet. And I'm like, you don't get it, do you? It's not. Internet is a thing. It is a service on a network. The telecoms deliver TV, phone, and internet. Why aren't they delivering more things over the same network?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Especially to claw back a lot of the revenues that they're having to give up at this race to the bottom, right? Why can't you sell when you have managed Wi-Fi? Suddenly you can sell for $50 a month assisted living where you actually know when someone's vertical or horizontal. If it's horizontal in the bedroom, it's okay. But it's on the hallway, what the heck's going on? It's called dad when you're laying down in the hallway.
Kevin, as you hear these technologists talk about this, what do you think about? Like, what's the kind of policy angle on the managed Wi-Fi piece of this multifamily space?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ted is exactly right. Both from a property owner perspective and also from a policymaker perspective, we think of it as internet, but we really do need to broaden that conversation to be more about the resilient network, the robust network behind it all. That, I think even if you go to the FCC, they talk about the importance of, the emerging Internet of Things, IoT. They talk about it like it's a new concept. It's been around. There have been networks, there have been, these needs in the past. But it's, we have to be careful not to shortchange ourselves and just focus on the delivery of internet. We need to build out the more robust networks to support all of them, connectivity more broadly, life care, all of it. It all plays a really important role.
Yeah. It's just one thing, and that's like in Canada, I volunteer with different cities. And my soapbox statement that always resonates, and this is a place where they can influence, no more dumb buildings. It's that simple. Create the policy, create the standards, as he was saying, to make sure that the building is built in such a way that it's allowing the networks we need for the future.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're wrapping up towards the end. I want to give each of you a chance to blue sky just a little bit about the entire space, the smart home, the smart apartment building, the smart city, okay, and how the technologies and the policies and the new investment that's coming, both public financing and private financing, is playing into this. Let's actually start with Kurt, just in case he has to leave a little bit early, and then Ted, and then Kevin will close us out. Just about a minute or two on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really, really exciting times, right? With the amount of funding, both public and private, and here in the U.S. we have tremendous amounts of funding coming down. It's going to allow this country to basically fiber up more homes probably in the next 4 years than we have in the previous 40. That's super exciting. That's gonna drive innovation, which drives costs down, which allows a more inclusive society, because there's harder to reach places like these older apartment buildings. we'll have, you know, the cost centers that equate to those business cases for those building owners, right, like that. As well, what's really exciting is when we start getting these open and software-defined networks, where these aren't one-off networks.
Right.
Going back to our analogy, right? The interstate system that was built in the 60s was built for national security. I don't know the last time I saw a bunch of tanks rolling down I-65 in Huntsville, Alabama, but I see a lot of other things driving on those interstates that add value to our lives, right? So it's really exciting that we get these software-defined networks and these open networks, the type of applications that we can just literally dream it and we can do it, because we have the deep end-to-end network visibility. Visibility right to someone's device. These aren't chopped up networks where you own this piece, I own this piece. We actually have deep visibility to pull the analytics, get those data lakes, and start using this information for the common good, right?
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Kurt, and for the work that AdTrend is doing, both in the single-family space and the multifamily space. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Ted.
I guess the thing that I see that's not happening is a focus on strategy. There's always this focus on outcomes. I want this, I want this, I want this, and not realizing that it comes down to basic principles of networks, people looking at the same interfaces. And the policy side does. I'm not a fan of big government, sorry, but I'm not. But there's places where the government can push to create the standards that people start to build what we know we need. Now, the reason I'm passionate about this stuff is every social challenge that we face can be addressed by this technology if we do it right. Right? So if we build networks that connect people, devices, sensors, if we have people in communities looking at common apps, if we start using machine learning and artificial intelligence, yes, we're going to make more sustainable neighborhoods that are more secure, that are more convenient, and we're going to drive economic growth. So let's just step back. Let's not go and chase the shiny objects. Let's be very purposeful in how we think about how we're going about this, that there's a strategy that's going to lead to the outcomes we want.
Well, and what a great thought you shared with us earlier, Ted, about the smart apartment building being a kind of a prototype or a petri dish for the smart cities, right? And I think kind of just to tease out that point, it's like the sensor-based world, right? Where things that we don't normally or haven't been part of an IP and internet protocol network are now kind of linking in and tripping up. So I think it's great to kind of be thinking of this space in terms of smart cities, and I appreciate what you brought to our discussion, Ted. Thanks for being with us. Kevin, will you give me the last word here?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I think, hearkening to that point, at NMHC, we often talk about multifamily communities, the apartment of the future. It really is the innovation lab of America, of the world, in many cases. What was cool tech 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the Amazon Alexa coming to market. That was cool for a couple days in multifamily terms, right? Like we've moved so far beyond that, and I think the point is that the future is bright. It is not only a necessity at this point, it is a just absolute critical mission for our members to get the technology right, to have a strategy so that you're not wasting funds. You're not putting in the Amazon Alexa that's never going to be used. You're putting in the backbone of a network that's going to support you today, but also give value to that property for years to come. And so I think, our members try to strike this balance of, being able to deliver returns for their investors now, but also make sure that they're attractive for years and years to come. So I think, whether we're talking about policy and we're talking about FCC work and NTIA doing, huge amounts in infrastructure build out across the country, we want to be a part of that. We think it's an important thing for us to get right, policymakers to get right, but also it's because, very frankly, it is competitive. We need to make sure that our properties and our sector in the economy is hyper competitive moving into the future. So we're bullish on where we're going in technology and broadband.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for being with us, Kevin, for giving the perspective of the National Multifamily Housing Council. I hope I got that right.
You got that right.
And on behalf of Kurt, Ted, and Kevin, I'm Drew Clark of Broadband Breakfast. Want to remind you that next Wednesday at 12 noon, we'll be live online, but we'll also be in person at Clyde's Gallery Place. And we have other exciting programs that are coming forward. Make sure to check them out at broadbandbreakfast.com/BBLO. And also want to give a shout out to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. Thank you to Utopia Fiber, Broadband Now, Broadband Money, Lightbox, Samsung, and also UCLA, California Emerging Technology Fund, Connect the Future, Positron Access, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, as well as Sci-Fi Networks. Very excited to have all of our sponsors and to have an exciting series of programs that you can participate in because of them. Once again, from Houston, we'll bid you au revoir until next Wednesday at 12 noon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.